Welcome to a Wiser Retirement podcast. Before we get started with the episode, I want to tell you about a new ebook available on our website called Buyer Beware. Why do they keep trying to sell you that annuity? This ebook covers the various types of annuities, negatives to owning annuities, and better investment alternatives to annuities. To download this ebook, you can click the link in the episode notes or go to wiserinvestor.com and you'll find it at the bottom of the page. Now on to today's episode.
Welcome to a Wiser Retirement podcast, where we believe the best financial advice should always be conflict-free. I'm your host, Casey Smith. Today I'm joined with our guest, Captain Evan Bogan. Hey, Evan.
Good morning, Casey. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming in. You're a captain on a 737.
Correct.
And I think most of our listeners probably know this by now, but I have a background in aviation. I was a captain of a much smaller airplane for a while, a CRJ-200. Your airplane's probably more fun to fly.
Well, there's a lot of similarities.
Has wings and an engine. Yes, you're right.
Correct. And I think we're going to get into that.
That's right. So today we're going to be talking about how to determine if your retirement plan is ready for takeoff. And I love airplane analogies. And I was thinking through this podcast and I thought, retirement planning is so much like aviation.
Absolutely.
And so I put together this analogy, and then I invited you to come on and be the pilot expert and all this. Good. And maybe the listeners learn a little bit about obviously financial planning, but also aviation in the process. And I think about a third of our client base are airline pilots themselves, so they might get a kick out of how we connect the dots.
Feedback. I better be careful what I say here. I've got a lot of critics.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Monday morning quarterbacking, right?
We love to do that.
All right, so here's kind of a summary. So when you think about an airplane, you think about the cockpit, you think about the wings, the engines, the fuselage, the flight plan. And so what we're going to do is break this down into financial planning topics. So think about the cockpit's your team, your CPA, your attorney, your financial advisor. The wings is where they store the fuel of an airplane. So the fuel's in the wings. So wings basically is your savings, your investments. The engines is your income in retirement, so your Social Security, your pension, your IRA, your Roth, etc. That's where your power is coming from. The fuselage is your debts and expenses. We like to have tiny fuselages in our retirement plans. Big fat airplanes with short wings and underpowered engines don't fly at all, do they?
No, they would not.
In fact, you had an analogy, I think, the Spruce Goose, right?
Absolutely. The Spruce Goose, one of the biggest airplanes ever made. A lot of people are familiar with Howard Hughes's Dream.
Right.
It had 8 engines, the most powerful engines of the day. The one time it flew, it only got 70 feet into the air, and it flew for a mile. So even the most powerful engines couldn't lift that big, heavy fuselage.
Right. And we don't want that to happen for your retirement at all. And then we talk about the flight plan. This is what I think most passengers on airplanes don't understand is what goes into flight planning. So, that's weather notices, fuel planning. That's much like financial planning. And there's so many components that go into a retirement, even pre-retirement, honestly. So let's get started and let's talk about the cockpit. So the cockpit is the leadership of the airplane, right?
Correct.
And when you think about your financial planning, the hero, you're the captain. All the clients are the captains. And think about in aviation terms, who supports the captain?
There's a lot of people that do. The captain gets to make the final say in a lot of the decisions, but even the most seasoned captain needs the input of an army of people that do various different jobs to help them make the correct decision, especially when something's not quite going the way we would like to.
Yeah. We
have dispatchers, we have meteorologists, we have maintenance technicians, and all these people are available to help the captain make the correct decision. In the world of smaller airplanes, general aviation pilots flying light single-engine airplanes have less of the ability to call on those people, but there's still teams they can call on. There's still experts that can help, even though a lot of it is on the pilot in the world of small airplanes.
It's when you're the captain, there's a lot of things that rest on you because in the end you're responsible. I remember. Do you remember in the news several years ago? I think it was Republic Airways under the United banner, and they hauled off that guy. Like,
that was an unfortunate situation. Yes, it was.
So there is an Asian person, I think is a man, that refused to give up his seat. It was an oversold situation. For whatever reason, he had to be home, and they targeted him. They said, okay, well, you were the last person to buy a ticket. I don't know. They have whole reasons of how they pick somebody, and he refused to leave. And so they called the police, or the airport police. Now, when I was a captain, I never let the airport police on the airplane. You know why? Because airport police are not made. They are not the guys giving you little traffic stops. These guys are made to take care, are trained to take care of the really bad guys, the guys who want to blow up stuff.
Security enforcement. I believe.
These are not your the cops that are handing out lollipops at your kid's school, right? And so I did everything I could to handle it myself, and let them take over at the jet bridge, right? And in this case, the captain was just, I think he just kind of checked out, and he allowed the people, the police to come on, and they end up, I think there was pictures of 2 cops holding 2 legs and 2 cops holding 2 arms, and
there might have been better ways to approach that situation.
And then after that, all of us got $10,000 if we wanted to give up our seats, right, for a little while. That is
true. So everybody benefited in one way, I suppose.
But they just that's a case of, I think, a captain not using all the resources available to him. There was no PR thinking and what could go Bradley.
That's the sort of thing you'd want to handle internally within your company, I think, before you called on the outside law enforcement.
Absolutely. Of course, we're obviously Monday morning quarterbacking that. But you think about your team, you think about a CPA, an attorney, a financial planner. Financial planners typically are kind of like the quarterbacks. I guess they'd be like the dispatcher that pieces all the information together to be able to coordinate with your CPA and your attorney of what the big picture is and what they're trying to achieve.
I think that's a great analogy. The dispatcher provides the captain with the flight plan, the weather information, details about the specifics of the airport that we're flying to, and we take that all and we spend a few minutes with that information that the dispatcher provided before we even start the airplane in motion. So,
and then there's even the first officer, which is on the airplane, is often gathering information as the airplane's in motion, right?
Absolutely, and the captains rely on the first officers. We're teammates. We work together. The first officer handles some of the flying. The captain handles some of the flying, which a lot of people don't realize. People think the captain's doing everything. The first officer and the captain share the responsibilities, and oftentimes it's necessary to have that second point of view when you have to make the difficult decisions. So. This is my plug for never flying on a single pilot airplane in an airliner in the future.
That's right.
Both of those pilots in that cockpit are equally as important to the safety of the operation.
That's true. There's a lot of talk now about automation has gotten so dependable now that maybe they remove one of the pilots, and we're flying 737s single pilot.
The automation can reduce the workload, but it can never make up for that second point of view, which you often need to make the right decision.
I remember as a first officer, I can talk about my airline because it's no longer in existence. But I was at Atlantic Southeast Airlines, which was a Delta subsidiary up until Delta's bankruptcy, and then it got sold, and we flew under a different name after that. But I remember going into Pennsylvania, and the winds were crazy. And I remember looking at the direct crosswind going, man, this exceeds like anything in our manual. And the gust was like double that, right? Nobody was landing there. But our captain was dead set that he was going to make that landing. And so what I did was I just kept getting the weather, and the weather kept, they'll do specials. So you have your weather done every hour that you can get on a certain frequency, and this one was being updated. It seemed like every 15 minutes there was a new special, in between. And so all I knew to do is just keep repeating to him the weather and then the facts. And I would say, okay, the winds are gusting to 35. It's a direct gust now.
Right.
And eventually, then we turned final. Now we're inside final approach. Now we're on with tower. And I just keep repeating. Now the winds are, and then finally it clicked. finally it clicked, and he goes, "Okay, we'll go miss. We'll go to the alternate." And then we ended up in like Harrisburg or someplace like that.
we train our new pilots at my company to gradually escalate the intensity of their conversation in a situation like that. But it's real easy, and I suppose there's a financial analogy here as well. When flying an airplane in a situation like that, it would be real easy to be tunnel vision focused on landing the airplane.
Yeah.
And I guess in your world of finance, it would be real easy to focus on whatever your primary goal is, saving for retirement or a specific event.
Well, I think the better analogy is probably in 2022 and early 2020 when the market's just doing crazy stuff. And you focus solely on the value of your portfolio.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And you're not focused on the big picture.
My wife banned me from looking at the numbers on our accounts during that time. She said, "We're not retiring soon. Don't worry about it. It'll come back." So
right, there you go.
We always need that.
That's a great wife.
That outside. I agree. We always need that outside input occasionally to help us expand our aperture and make sure we're looking at the big picture and not just focusing on a specific thing, both in flying and I guess in finance as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we use the same technique with clients sometimes to get hyper focused. Is you have to say, okay, but it's going to be okay because you have this and this and this planned, and this is how this works out. So it's very much the same. And obviously dealing with different personalities. In finance, it's obviously very easy to, hey, don't really like this guy's personality that much. We're going to find a different advisor, or maybe the client doesn't work for us. And like, I don't know, this guy's not going to listen. Aviation, you're stuck with the guy for 3 or 4 days, right?
Yes,
so you have to learn how
you
have to learn how to kind of get along.
And we all come from different backgrounds. We have those of us that learned in the civilian world. We have pilots that learned in the military world, and we come from different points of view sometimes. But one of the goals of airline training at any airline is to make us all have a common point of view, so that when we get in the cockpit and we have to spend 3 or 4 days together, you might not like the person. It might not be the person you want to go out and have a beer with at the end of the trip.
Right.
But for those 4 days, you're on the same team, you're working together, and you overcome those differences to operate safely.
So now that we've assembled our CPA attorney and financial planner, let's talk about wings. So obviously, this is where the fuel's stored. In my analogy, this is your savings. This is your investments for the future. It could be time is in your wings, meaning that you served long enough to vest in that company pension. You worked long enough to get Social Security, or it's hard cash. You know, you put cash into your 401k plan and it got matched, or you had contributions to it. When you think about fuel in your wings of a commercial airliner, different wings can take you different distances, right? A 777 is going to go pretty far. CRJ, we get a good 1,500 miles and I think we're done.
I think this is a great analogy, and maybe one of the most applicable between finance and flying. We have to have enough fuel in our aircraft to get to our destination. We have to have enough money in our financial investments to take us to our ultimate goals. We can make the plan based on the best information we have at the time, but we always need to be willing to change the plan. The headwinds might increase. We might have a situation where the weather at the airport might not allow us to land. So in that case, we have to make sure that we have brought enough fuel along and continue to monitor that fuel level as we progress in the flight, so that we have options when we get to our destination if we can't land. So we can get to somewhere else and we can safely land the airplane with enough fuel as a reserve.
I was witness to a very poor soul who we were on approach, and you can hear planes that departed too, right? And in this case, it was a small airport, but what had happened was the plane had come in, and I guess they thought they had fuel, but they never checked. They took off with not enough fuel. Oh, it's on company frequency. It was on company radio. You could hear it on the company radio. They took off and didn't have enough fuel to get to their destination.
That's embarrassing. At least they figured that out.
That is very embarrassing. That is very embarrassing. Well, yeah, the computer tells you. There's 2 different modes it could be in, but this one was in, I guess, measured fuel. So as you're climbing, right, it says 0 on landing, but as you power back after takeoff, it'll show you. And I think they looked down and saw 0 still, and it probably freaked them out.
Well, there was a very famous situation where when the 767 was new, you might have read about this, where an Air Canada jet ran out of fuel and they glided it to a landing on a drag strip because there was the fuel was supposed to be loaded in liters and it was loaded in gallons or something to that effect.
Oh,
I can't recall specifically.
I do not
how it
remember that
happened.
story.
Yep. It was the first 767 and only 767 glider, but that captain managed to land it safely and
Dead sticked it
sticked it onto a drag strip in the middle of nowhere in Canada.
Jeez, that's crazy.
So not only do we need to make sure we have enough fuel, we need to make sure we use the right units when we put that fuel in there.
Yeah, that's right. Don't measure it in won. Make sure you measure it in US dollars.
There you go.
But yeah, so you want to make sure in planning that you're going to be retired for 35 years or 30 years. You want to make sure that the savings that you have is enough to get you through. And what we do here is we use what they call a Monte Carlo simulation, where it's running 1,000 different stock and bond market scenarios and coming up with a probability of success. So we're focused on, this 85% probability of not running out of money before age 95. And we use 85% simply because the program's so conservative. We have inflation set higher than it actually is. We have a reserve built in that you should never really have to tap into. Sure. So if you do 100% or 99%, you're going to end up leaving probably a lot of money to the next of kin unnecessarily, unless that's your purpose. But it's much like that in fuel planning for a flight as well. You have contingencies.
Sure. In 30 years of flying, I can count on one hand the number of times I've needed my reserve fuel, but I've always had it with me. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I remember when I first started flying back in early 2000 that they said the fuel in the fuel truck and the altitude below you never helps you or something like that.
And runway behind you.
The runway behind you and the runway behind you. That's right.
The three most useless things in aviation.
Thank goodness now. I think it's just getting a lot harder to make mistakes, I feel like, although aviation's certainly in a weird time right now. Some weird things have been popping up on the news with near misses and things of that nature. But
for sure,
I haven't heard of anybody running out of fuel.
No, thankfully not. The technology has improved significantly, both in the world of airline planning and in the world of general aviation planning with, the advent of the iPad.
Yeah.
Everything we used to do on paper and with a pencil and an E6B, which was a mechanical slide rule style computer that dates back to World War II. You probably learned to fly with one of those,
that's right.
As did I. It can all be done on a single app on the iPad now with a much greater accuracy than we could ever hope for.
That's it. It is amazing. And then how it all syncs together, even in flight, which is pretty cool these days. Okay. So we know we have to have wings with fuel, or portfolios with money in them, right? So let's talk about engines for a minute. So the wings, the fuel from the wings feeds down to the engines, and the engines burn that fuel and create the power that's necessary for flight, right? Yes. So ultimately, this is your income in retirement, your Social Security, your pension, your IRA, your Roth, your brokerage account. And it's important to know when to take Social Security, when to withdraw from the Roth versus the IRA. These are all part of the planning techniques, just like in aviation. In your analogy, we can have engines that are too small and not big enough to power the airplane, right?
Right.
And then we could also have engines that are way too big and burn way too much fuel for what we're really needing.
Sure. This gets a little bit more into engineering, which maybe if I was a little smarter, I would have been an engineer, but I just fly them.
Right.
I would imagine that when an engineer is designing an airplane, they take all those things into account. There's no need to carry the excess weight of a bigger engine and burn the extra fuel when you're not going to need it. And on the contrary, you certainly don't want to have an engine that's underpowered that limits the capability of the airplane to do what it needs to do.
Right. So when we start looking at Social Security and when to take it, we don't have to fight clients too much on this. We have a very smart client base. But typically it's for most people who are going to live past age 78, you want to wait till 70 to take Social Security. 78 is kind of the break even of missing all those payments earlier and delaying it for later. And so that's the most efficient way to have the maximum income over your retirement life. Pensions, it varies by pension, and it is better to wait. We found that the military pension for retirees, it's better to wait. It keeps compounding, much like Social Security does. But yet people seem to take that really early when they think they need to, but they don't always have to. We also talk about Roth versus IRA. So when you pass away now, your IRA will be inherited by your beneficiaries, but has to be liquidated over 10 years, where the Roth does not. So in many cases, it seems more efficient that you would take the Roth first because it's tax-free, defer the IRA as long as possible. But from a estate planning standpoint, it might be better to pay the tax now and then leave as much tax-free income to the next generation as possible.
Sure.
So it kind of depends on what the objective is, and when it comes to the planning on that front. And then also too is you think about your engines, again, it's coming from your fuel tank. So this is where the analogy goes awry a little bit, but there's actually really cool footage I'm sure you could find anything on YouTube these days, right?
Sure.
But
my kids will show you where to find whatever you need.
Right. But these engines, man, they take like frozen turkeys and they throw shoot frozen turkeys into these engines.
They're very
simulate bird
resilient.
strikes.
Absolutely.
And they just keep going.
They do.
I don't know what happened to Sully's plane. Evidently
that was a lot of birds. That wasn't just one bird. And a bad day
You can't take a fleet of frozen turkeys.
Right.
But you can take one or two frozen turkeys. But yeah, the engines should be able to take a punishment and keep going. And I guess it's kind of how we look at our in retirement, our reserves. So for our retirees, we always keep about 2 years worth of their expenses in reserve. So when they were drawing money, it's kind of like a collector tank. We're gonna get really technical. It's kind of like a collector tank in an engine, right? It comes down from the fuel tank, but then it sits in this little small tank before it gets to the engine,
sure,
right?
Sure.
And so our collector tank is this reserve cash, and it's about 2 years worth of income, so that when the market behaves like it did in 2022, the beginning of 2020, you're taking your monthly withdrawal, but you're not actually having to sell anything for a loss in the portfolio. So that's the key to psychologically being able to weather those kind of storms. Sure. And we got a lot of phone calls at the beginning of 2020, COVID, saying, okay, I can cut back my withdrawals for about 4 months. I'm like, you don't need to do that. The money's already in cash. It's literally here waiting for you to withdraw it, or a cash-like instrument that had a high yield. So that's how we think about, I guess, engines. Fuselage, that's so we always get amazed when we see like the A380 or the old 74s, rolling
Sure.
down the runway.
It's amazing to watch.
But how much fuel and engine do you have to have to get that thing in the air?
Each one of those engines on an A380 is the diameter of the fuselage on my 737. Put it into perspective. They are huge.
So they have 737 size engines, the power on that's A380.
Each one of those engines. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's big.
It's huge. I can't even imagine. I've no desire personally to fly that sort of operation. I would prefer to be in a bed at night and not over the ocean. But
right.
737 is where I enjoy flying. But yeah, so if you picture the cabin of a 737, 6 people across plus an aisle, that could fit in the engine of an A380
of an
or
A380.
a 777 for that matter.
Wow. So you think about your fuselage and how big your engine has to be if you have a mortgage still in retirement, if you have large bills still in retirement. Hopefully you don't have $1,200 car notes, but you could, right? But you just have so many things that you have to pay in retirement. So therefore you're going to have a lot more money in order to power that fuselage up into the air. So you may want to have a retirement of multiple club memberships and expensive toys, and that's fine. That's great. But just know that if you like that look of the triple decker and the first class apartments,
you better make sure you have the engines.
You better make sure you have 737 fuselage engines.
Absolutely.
to power it in.
That's a great analogy.
So yeah, we have clients of all types. I mean, we have clients that if they didn't make $250,000 a year, they'd be panicking. And then we have other families that live very humbly, making $35,000 a year, that are as happy as can be.
Sure.
Doing what they want to do every day. So it just depends, you know? I guess the only other, thing I'll add there is, as you transition toward retirement, then it's kind of like, I guess, building of the airplane. You need to make sure that you're right sizing your engines and your fuel tanks. None of these are decisions you make the month before you hang it up.
Right.
These are all things that you build toward over time. And I think, you know, all this kind of sets in on people about 5 years prior. But if you can get in 10 or 15 years prior, you can make real differences.
Sure. Yeah.
5 years prior, we're having to make some crazy recommendations in order to get
there's
people.
Certainly a lot more opportunity to make those changes in your financial planning than once you've built an airplane.
Yes.
Once that fuselage and those engines have been attached, that's the airplane you have. And if an airline finds it's burning too much fuel, or it's carrying not enough people, they need to sell it and buy a new one. But
right.
Thankfully, with our finances, we can make those changes. We can change the size of the fuselage, quote unquote, or the engines
Absolutely.
to fit what our plans are or our needs.
So let's go into flight planning. So now we've got our airplane, and we know what it's capable of, but we still have to put it to the test.
Sure.
And then once we put it to the test, we have to start running down the runway and taking off. And so a lot of people think, you know, I don't know. Over the years, I've gotten a lot of questions like, what route do you fly?
Everyone asks that.
So we should have a whole episode just on that. All the silly questions. I had one kid in the airport ask me one time if I was a policeman.
Oh, that happens all the time. And ask you to take their bags when you're standing in front of the hotel with our little hats on.
I'd never had that happen to me. That's hilarious.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. You say, I'm sorry, the day's in, we don't do that.
Yeah, that's right.
So let's talk about flight planning for a second. So what goes into building a flight plan? I mean, when you tax, I'm a customer, I buy a ticket. I mean, we have flights every hour to Boston. They're all the same, right?
To some extent, they are. A flight that occurs multiple times a day has a lot of things that historically the dispatcher and the pilots will know. The route, for example, from Atlanta to New York, that route probably gets flown 15 or 20 times a day by several different airlines. It's always the same flight routing, barring weather things and closed airspace and things like that. But the dispatcher will know that. The weather information is known ahead of time. The dispatcher will use that weather information to adjust the fuel load, to determine whether you need a different airport as an alternate or a backup plan in case the weather gets too poor at your destination to allow you to land. In addition to that, you'll have the aircraft itself. It'll have a history of maintenance. Maybe there are some things on the airplane that have been worked on recently that the crew would want to know about to make sure that they keep an eye on, make sure it doesn't go wrong again. We have all these different specialists working with us to make sure that flight can be accomplished safely. And then even, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, in the world of general aviation, which that term might not be familiar to all of your clients and listeners, general aviation would encompass, all flying that's not airline flying. So private flying, corporate flying, things like that. So those pilots don't have that army of people to help them. A lot of that stuff is on the pilot themselves to do the planning, to make sure they're familiar with the maintenance of the aircraft, the weather, all that sort of stuff. But even in that world, the modern world of iPads and apps like we talked about earlier, you still have the ability to make a phone call and speak with a flight service specialist and ask about the weather and get a detailed weather briefing from a human being that might help you get a bigger picture. Right. So even though we have the capability of doing a lot of that planning ourselves in the general aviation world, we still sometimes need to call on the experts. Yep.
And then there's also pilot reports in there, which I used a lot. And as a professional pilot, because in a jet, you have a lot of different altitudes you can choose from, but looking for ride reports. No one likes the bumpy rides, right?
Correct.
So you're trying to figure out, okay, where's the smooth air? Where can we go to get smooth air? Looking at the weather, that's also you might want to add additional fuel, right? Maybe more than what your team thought you actually needed.
And that's always an option.
Much like in financial planning, we might need to say, well, we should maybe move a little more in reserves for this reason. When I was at ASA, after we got sold, we began doing some flying for United. So this was the first time we were never a Delta carrier. We flew for Delta and United. And so I transferred to the Dulles base, and I was based in Dulles for about a year. And because I was a more senior captain there, could choose my schedules. I could be in my office pretty much Monday through Thursday, and I'd fly Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And they started this whole thing of just enough fuel for fuel efficiency. There's a whole name for it, the campaign.
Yes.
And basically they said, hey, you guys are carrying too much fuel, and because you're heavier, then you're gonna you cost us more money, right?
Right.
And so they leave you with just enough fuel to get to where you're going, and just enough fuel to go 45 minutes. And that was it. Saying commercial airliners never go into that reserve very much. And I remember they even had the fuelers on board with this. They would not give you extra fuel unless you called your dispatcher, and your dispatcher wouldn't approve it. So I had a whole line that I did. So I'd go out there, I'd do the walk around in Dulles, and I'd say, I need an extra 200 pounds of fuel. They go, you have to call your dispatcher.
Right.
And I said, oh man, we're really short on time. I just need an extra 200 pounds because we got bad weather where we're going. We don't want to run out of fuel. Of course, right. These ground guys, they know nothing about aviation, right? We're not going to run out of fuel. But anyway, that's how I got my extra 200 pounds. Was giving a sob story to each fueler as they drove the truck by, and my way of going, because ultimately what I wanted to do is fly a little faster. I want to get the people to the destination a little faster, and you couldn't do that and
I think that
not have the extra
a great
fuel
analogy there as well. And sometimes you can have very cut and dry data that shows you that something is going to work or something is going to be safe, but you just have that feeling or that discomfort that it's not right for you.
Yeah.
So in that case, you ask for more fuel because you're in the airplane and the dispatcher's in an office.
Yes.
Right.
That's
I'm sure you have a situation where you might give a client very factual data that shows that the plan is going to work for them, but it just doesn't feel right for them.
Yep.
So you have to adjust for them in order to accommodate
the risk tolerance.
Risk tolerance. And I know we've spoken about that before.
Yeah. Certainly with the risk tolerance. I would say that another analogy for that is when you have that gut feeling something isn't right, they're probably trying to sell you an annuity. Right.
Yes.
So I've heard so many people tell us that over the years, saying, well, I have these 3 annuities. If I can't sell them for 14 years, it's going to cost me a fortune. But I knew when I did it, it just wasn't something right about it, but I didn't know what else to do. And so that every time you have that gut feeling that the person you're talking to is trying to just sell you something, that in financial services, that's the time to walk away. The car salesman's there to sell you something. Everyone knows what the game is.
Right.
But your financial person you should never have that feeling of, can I really trust what they're saying? Are they really working on my team? That's something that should never cross your mind. Unfortunately, it's very common in our industry right now. But yeah, so when you think about planning for your future in your flight plan, that is the financial plan. That's kind of putting everything together, saying this is what the capability of your airplane is. This is the destination you want to go to. And this is where you can't compare yourself to other people, right? Somebody might be going to Boston.
Absolutely.
Someone else is going to Tahiti. Someone else is going to Mexico. Someone else is going to Baton Rouge. Why? I don't know. But that's where they want to go, right?
Sure. Good Cajun food.
That's true. That's what I like about you. Always think about the positive things.
There we go. Glass half full.
That's
Gotta
right.
be. Gotta be.
So the point is that you can't compare your plan to someone else's plan. Everyone has their own number.
Absolutely.
Fidelity had a great commercial many years ago. What's your number? And everyone had their own
that
number. That's actually, of all the big brokerage houses, that's probably one of the best ones. And as far as reality goes, someone's number might be $3.5 million. Someone else might need 10. Someone else might need $1.5 million. It just, everyone's different.
Absolutely. And one of the points I always make to new pilots or new captains that I work with is you can only make the decision based on the information you have at hand at the time. You can't second guess yourself after the fact because you didn't have all the pieces of information when you made the call.
Right.
Retain the flexibility to adjust your decision. have the ability to alter your course, but don't beat yourself up if you made a wrong decision, because we all do.
Yep. So what, let's shift gears for a second. We got an extra few minutes here. So we have a situation where we had Southwest taking off, FedEx landing in Austin, almost on, the FedEx plane's coming down on top of the Southwest plane. We have the American plane crossing the runway, active runway, over in JFK. That Delta did the abort, went to the gate, checked out for the day. It's like, peace out, we're done. What's happening? Do you think it's just more televised now, or are there some pressures being on the system right now?
The system is definitely taxed at the moment with the same issues that just about every industry has. New people, getting enough people to do the jobs, training the people to make sure they have enough experience.
You're not talking about just pilots. You're talking about everybody.
Every industry, pilots, air traffic controllers, maintainers, things like that. The one thing that makes me feel better about all those incidents is no metal got bent, as we say.
Yeah.
No one got hurt.
True.
At the end of the day, the system worked. Somebody trapped those issues. The Swiss cheese model is what we talk about in aviation safety. When the holes of the slices of Swiss cheese line up, you can have an accident, but all it takes is one of those slices to move over a little bit to block the accident from occurring.
Yeah.
So in the situation in Austin, that FedEx crew had the awareness of what was going on to call the go-around to avoid it. In JFK, the air traffic controller was the one with the big picture that stopped the incident from happening. So while each one of those had the potential for significant loss of life, none of them did. None of them came close. The FedEx airplane was 75 to 100 feet over the Southwest airplane. The Delta airplane stopped 1,000 feet before that American airplane on the runway.
Which is a good distance.
It's a good distance.
Yeah.
So it makes me feel better to know that at the end of the day, one of the slices of Swiss cheese blocked the incident. To go back to that model.
So that was a 737 that stopped. Was that a 73? Yeah.
It was a 737.
So it's interesting, and we talked about this on our crypto podcast, ironically, is that the media doesn't always get things right. And aviation is one of those things that makes me give pause to any media article, because
there are very few media personalities or reporters that have the background to report accurately, and they're fighting the difficult situation of a very technical situation and putting it in the terms that the general public can understand. So I don't envy that either.
True. So, but when a 737 does a rejected takeoff at that speed, you probably have to go back for a brake check or something, I would think. You just can't turn around and take off again.
Correct. We have a chart that we would go into that would show us the amount of time we would have to wait based on the speed the aircraft aborted at so that the brakes could cool. Okay. In that situation, I'm not familiar with the specifics of how fast they were.
Right.
But I would imagine that that chart told them they had a significant amount of time, and there might have been a duty day limitation, whereas the crew couldn't wait that long and then continue on their flight legally.
They weren't, I guess the point is there's actually articles out there to say, well, they're probably just really shaken by the experience and called it a day. And I'm like, no, I don't think so.
There might be something to that in that when a significant event like that occurs, you don't want to assume a crew is mentally fit to fly at that point.
Yeah.
You don't want to say, you almost just crashed into a 777, but please go fly to Santo Domingo anyways.
Right.
So I'm sure that they had a conversation with the chief pilots in addition to the maintenance crew before the decision to cancel that flight occurred.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair enough. I guess that's probably more new to aviation. I think back in the day,
I think you're
would
probably
have slapped him on the butt and told him, hey, go do it again.
Back in the early days of aviation, we didn't really think so much about the mental fitness to fly, and that is definitely something that in the modern world we do consider, because most of the mistakes that get made in aviation are mental mistakes, not skill-based errors.
Well, I just remember my time during recurrent ground chaining. They used to show us all the other airlines' stupid stuff they did and said, don't do this stuff. But then as the airplanes became smarter, they started collecting data. And then the ground schools switched to, this is the stupid stuff you guys are doing.
Many companies now have the ability for flight crews to use an app to see the data from their specific flight, so that they can self-analyze how well they did.
Yes,
and it's really an amazing improvement in really opening pilots' eyes to make those corrections without being told, because we're all our biggest critics in many aspects of life.
I just learned of this.
Yeah,
I did not know this existed, but I was talking to a pilot who's a mutual friend of mine, and he was explaining a situation. He had just upgraded to captain, but he was explaining a situation. The captain was just checked out mentally for whatever reason, and he was like, "Hey, you're too fast. You're too high on final. This is not going to work out well." And the captain made it work out okay in the end. But when he goes back and reviewed, it's like a number or some sort. Like and it compares you to other pilots in the system.
The flight data recorder has hundreds of parameters of data that it can show, and these apps that are available to several different airlines now allow crews to, like you said, compare their performance with historical data from hundreds and hundreds of other flights flown by their other pilots. And
so
on the same
it's kind of like getting in your car, driving to work, and then the app pops up and says, "This is your drive quality today."
Absolutely. Everybody else that drove a Toyota Camry on I-75 this morning between these two exits drove it at this speed,
right?
And maintained the lanes, with this level of accuracy. And here's how you did. So you can say, maybe next time I'll slow down a little bit, or maybe next time I'll make sure I stay in the center lane a little bit easier.
That's actually really good if you're using it to self-improve. I could see a lot of people just probably not even opening the app unless they were told to.
It's really interesting, though. I think most of us like to seek out ways to improve, so that the next time someone's watching, we can do a better job.
So you're basically gamifying safety.
In a certain aspect,
which is cool. I mean, that's cool.
And whatever we can do to make safety more interesting, because in general it's a fairly dry topic.
Yeah.
Whatever we can do to make, and this is not just true of airline pilots, it's probably true of professionals in any industry, say doctors, lawyers, whatever we can do to analyze our own performance and compare it to others and self-critique ourselves.
Mistake-proof the process.
To make better decisions before they become errors.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, in the end, I don't know that, ALPA right now is saying that there's really no pilot shortage, that there's at the majors, definitely at the regionals, but not,
correct,
because there's so many qualified pilots flying in other areas of aviation that they can keep getting people to come in. From your perspective, do you feel like as an industry we still have well-trained pilots?
Absolutely. The background of the well-trained pilots is historically changing. As you're probably aware, in the airline industry years ago, 75% or more came out of the military.
Right. Military
pilots are very well-trained. The government spends a lot of money making sure that they can operate very high-performance aircraft very safely, and at a very young age, I'll throw in as well. And the transition to the airline world was a natural movement for them once they completed their military careers. Probably 25, 30 years ago, that paradigm started to shift towards more professional training in the civilian world at large aviation colleges, large organizations, where from day one, pilots are being trained with the airline safety mindset.
Yeah.
So when they do get to the airline level, they might not have that level of experience operating the aircraft, operating the high-performance jets, but they have the same experience in decision-making. They've studied, there's something to be said, and we could have another discussion over the merits of academic training versus real-world experience. And we'll not get into that because we're almost done. But in some circumstances, we have to accept that we can't replicate the real-world experiences other than through academics. So we do that, and when pilots get to the airline level now, they might not have had the stick and rudder time back in the old days, but they've studied it, and they've spent a great amount of time learning that same safety mindset. So when things do go wrong or they do face challenging situations, they can make the right decisions.
I get this question a lot these days. My son or daughter want to be an airline pilot. They just love aviation, and maybe they've done a 30-minute discovery flight or something like that, but they play Microsoft Flight Simulator every day, and someone who wants to get into aviation, who's maybe even in high school or early college now, what advice would you give them?
Well, most of the major airlines have recently dropped the requirement to have a college degree to get hired. College degree will still set you apart, will still give you a leg up in the interview process, but it's no longer required. It's quite feasible for a high school graduate to go to a flight training academy, a non-collegiate flight training academy, get all their ratings, and be an airline pilot by the time they're 21 years old.
Wow.
That being said, I'm a big fan of collegiate aviation. That was my background. I came up through one of the larger aviation colleges before I started my airline career, and the ability to take the 4 years to learn all that information, have a whole semester of jet engine technology, have a whole semester of meteorology, have a whole semester of navigation. It gives you a greater depth of knowledge. It also provides you with connections. And this industry is either a big, small industry or a small, big industry, depending on how you'd like to look at it.
Right.
And every job I've ever had in aviation, including my one that I have now and I've had for the last 23 years, is because of either something I did when I was at college or somebody I met when I was in college.
Interesting.
So you can get to the same destination multiple different ways, and it's all a question of what's a better fit for each individual.
It's hard for me to tell my own child to forego a 4-year degree.
I would agree. It's such a formative time in their life, and an opportunity to grow not only as a professional, if you desire to be an airline pilot, but as a person. I'm sure you can think of how you were when you were 18 versus how you were when you were 21. You learn a lot in those years, a lot about life, and
True.
I think those life skills are just as important as the technical skills of flying the airplane.
The but is airlines are all based on seniority numbers. So if you're a plumber and you have 20 years of experience and you move from plumber XYZ to plumber ABC, you get paid for the experience. In the airline world, you don't get compensated for that experience.
That's true.
So if you move, there are some incentives now for moving, but not at the majors, only at the regional level. But if you move from, let's say you're a 20-year pilot at Delta Airlines, you want to go to Southwest, you go to Southwest, you start at the bottom of the seniority list. So you get paid as if you know nothing, and you're just starting over. So a 4-year jump on a seniority number might be a really big deal at American, Delta, or United. Right.
That is true. That is true.
Maybe Southwest.
I had a discussion with a friend of mine who's a pilot examiner for the FAA on another podcast a few years ago. And we were talking about our careers and how we got to where we were, and what pieces of advice we would give to future aviators. And the one thing that occurred to me was that my friends and I that all came up through the college aviation ranks, we were also focused on the final destination, that we didn't enjoy the ride. So that was the piece of advice I gave for future aviators. No matter how you choose to get to where you want to be, make sure you take time to enjoy the ride.
Enjoy the process.
So if I'm going to graduate high school and focus so intently on getting to an airline by the time I'm 21, I don't know if I'm going to have time to enjoy the ride.
Yeah, true.
Once you get there, you think back and you go, well, it was a great experience, but I don't know if it was fun. and I think finding a balance between getting to where you want to be and enjoying the ride is probably the biggest piece of advice I would give to someone in that situation.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's probably said of a lot of us as we pass through middle age, looking back, going, maybe I took that too seriously. Maybe I should have.
Exactly. That was my point. Exactly.
Maybe I should.
It could have been more fun if I had let it be.
Right. It's just, when I came up through and then exited it, ultimately, I had to go fly at a small turboprop shop up in New England for a while because ASC wouldn't hire me because I didn't have 2,500 hours. And then in a matter of a couple of years, it switched. You just had to have a pulse and speak English. And, I remember just flying with new guys going, man, I mean, you've got it made. So I think that there's a great opportunity for people who want to be in aviation right now. And ultimately it's just learning a little bit how to play the game. I have a whole chess set in my head on this, and hear me out. So go to a 4-year school, make it aviation focused. You come out of that school. Now I have a preference. I think if it's because I live in Atlanta and I can go anywhere in the world on Delta. It's not that I hate any other airline. It's just that it's based on where I live,
sure,
and the places I want to go. Southwest could be a good choice too, but Southwest doesn't get me to Paris, right? Or right. More importantly, Scotland for golf.
So, I hear it's beautiful.
And so here's my plan. You tell me if I'm crazy. I say go get your 4-year degree in aviation. Get hired at Envoy. What good operation. You're on a guaranteed track at that point to fly heavy metal for American Airlines.
Sure. Yes.
You interview there. It's a guaranteed job all the way through. Just don't screw it up. Right.
Right.
Well, Delta loves no more than anybody else to pick people off from other airlines in their hiring pool. So then after you upgrade to captain, you get your 1,000, 1,500 hours, whatever it is. Then you keep applying Delta.
I have heard of that strategy. Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, or if the interview doesn't go the way you thought, because maybe you just didn't interview well that day or whatever, which you can now re-interview. Back in my day, you were done. You were on the list, the never interview list,
the undesirable list.
Yes, undesirable list. So then if you're at Envoy, you could continue on there if it didn't work out. But that's kind of been my late. Or you could do that with PSA. You could do that. But if you go to Endeavor, which is wholly owned by Delta, yeah, you're local, you're in the Delta system, but what's their incentive of pulling you out of the regionals into the main line, because there's a regional shortage, right?
Right. And I think, and again, getting off topic a little bit, I think that's probably the reason why all of those regional airlines will be eventually folded into their mainline partners. Because of pilot staffing issues.
You just lit up every chat board and online, but that statement.
Personal opinion, based nothing in fact. And I've got 15 years till I retire, but I think before I retire, I will see that.
You think you'll see just all get just kind of like the old days?
Yeah. Yep.
Interesting.
If not a common seniority list, then the much more well-defined path. And I think you're starting to see that, like you mentioned, with Envoy to American and Endeavor to Delta. I think you'll see a much more defined path so that they can continue to staff those regional airlines. Yeah. That model itself has changed several times over the years, so I think that'll continue to happen.
It has. What's old again is new again.
Right.
Remember what they had the Com Air Academy, and they said, "Oh, it's a terrible idea."
That's right. And Delta just recently announced a partnership with a flight school in Florida.
That's right.
In Vero Beach, Florida.
That's
it
right.
It used to be Flight Safety Academy and is now owned by another company, I think, out of England.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Okay. Well, Evan, thank you for your time. And hopefully we didn't bore everyone with our airline antics, but I know that this is a passion for so many of our clients, and then others just have questions about aviation. So maybe we answered some of those in the process.
We always love to talk about aviation and help people understand what we do up there. And thank you for having me. It's been fun.
All right. See you.
Thanks for listening to a Wiser Retirement podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you don't miss any new episodes. We'd also appreciate if you could leave a rating and review. If you have any questions about anything that was discussed today, head to wiserinvestor.com and reach out. This episode was produced and edited by Ken Hoadley.